Is lots of questions about our property tax, and I said, hey, how do we get to the public and have them learn some stuff about property tax, because even the assembly has a hard time grasping how to do property assessments. In fact, I just had a chat with Ms. White, and she quickly made my eyes glaze over. So anyway, so that's where this came from. We have Ms. Flick here today. She's our finance director, and I think we have members of our assessment group in the crowd, so we'll let her introduce them. But Ms. Flick has been with us for a bit and then got promoted to financial director. So ask all her questions, and I will take my mic away. Thank you. Ms. Flick, go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, Mayor Weldon. Thank you all for attending today, and for those of you who are watching via Zoom or maybe catching this later as it's being recorded. As the mayor said, there's property assessments are complicated, and there's a lot of nuances involved, and there's differences when we're talking about government doing property assessment versus if you're having an appraisal done because you're buying a home. And so what I hope to do today is speak a lot of plain English, but talk through the process, talk through some of those nuances. And the first thing we're going to do today is introduce the players, if you will, in the assessment process. We're going to go through some of the basics of property assessments, kind of the who, what, and when. And then we're going to get into more of the meaty topic of the types of properties and how valuations are performed. I think it's really important to note that the conversation today is not about property taxes. Property taxes are a policy decision that are the mill rate or the tax rate is set by the assembly. How those funds are spent are set by the assembly. What we're talking about today is the property assessment, determining the value of property, which then, yes, becomes a base for applying a rate to get to property tax. But our focus on the conversation today is really on the assessment piece. And so that's where we're going to stay for our conversation. So let's get started. I'll introduce the players in the property assessment world. The first is the International Association of Assessing Officers. This is often referred to as the IAAO. And this is the large nonprofit educational resource association. It's the professional organization of those individuals who do appraisals and assessing for government. What's really important to note is when we're in kindergarten or first grade and we're all thinking about what we want to do when we grow up, we want to be police officers and firefighters and doctors and teachers. Maybe a couple of us say, ooh, I like numbers. Maybe I can do math and be an accountant. Very few people, maybe if their parent happens to be in assessing or appraising, but very few people are like, oh, I want to go work for a government and be in the assessor's office. It's a profession and a trade that people find themselves in through, as you all know, through life. You have a plan that's very straight, and it's going to get you from A to Z, and then life takes you on a windy path. And so the IAAO plays a really important role in the process of government assessments because it is the standards organization. It sets the standards, it provides education, it provides certifications. That is the go-to organization when we look at how assessments should be done in government. A related organization is the Alaska Association of Assessing Officers, or AAAO. And this is the local chapter, if you will, of the IAAO. So this is really a group of professionals that are focused here in Alaska with the overall goal to promote justice and equity in the distribution of the tax burden. This group is dedicated to ensuring that we're improving standards in the assessment practice. We're training and certifying our assessing officers, that we're working together. There's cooperation amongst the agencies, particularly in Alaska. This is a really important organization. They, again, provide training that's easy for assessors in Alaska to get to, and it is quality. It is in line with the IAAO standards and training. And so this becomes an important player in our conversation of how assessments work and where we get our guidelines. You're going to hear a couple of words frequently through this conversation. Fair and equitable The assessor's office is working to ensure that properties are assessed using the same yardstick. So that there's equitable, no one's overvalued, no one's undervalued, and that tax burden is equally distributed amongst the properties within a taxing jurisdiction. So those are the two big organizations that assessing officers across the U.S., well, the IAAO across the U.S. and internationally, but here in Alaska, the AAAO works with to get our standards and to get training and work together. Here at CBJ, we have a mighty team of 8 who is our assessing office, part of our assessor's office. It is a division within the Department of Finance. And they are here to assess the fair and equitable value of property in the city and borough of Juneau. So I just put up here a quick little org chart, but I would really encourage you to see that the people that work in here are residents, they're property owners, they're parents, they're professionals, they're people in our community that are in our everyday life. So I'm going to take a moment and introduce our 3 main leaders in the area. In the assessor's office. First is Mary. She is our assessor. She holds a level 5 certification through the AAAO. That's the highest level of assessing certification that's available. She joined the assessor's office in 2010. She became the deputy assessor in 2016 and then became the assessor in 2019. And she oversees the entire assessing organization. Our deputy assessor, Aaron, is also here with us today. Aaron oversees all of the residential appraisals, and he holds a level 3 certification from the AAAO, and he joined the assessor's office in 2013 and became the deputy assessor in 2022. And then I'd like to introduce you to Greg. He is our brand new commercial appraiser. This position was added during FY24, addressing the need to make sure that we consistently looked at our commercial properties and that it was not lost in the shuffle of other things going on in the office. And so Greg has been really instrumental in, and will continue to be instrumental in bringing consistency and regular review of commercial properties. Greg right now is a level 2 certified AAAO, although he's 1 class shy of his level 3. So we'll be celebrating that with him very soon when he gets to his next level. He joined the assessor's office in 2019 and was just recently promoted to the commercial appraiser back in September. So all of our assessor staff are working towards various levels of certifications, and they're active within their professional organizations. So they're constantly getting training, they're working on those certifications, and they're staying relevant in the practice and the standards in their field. The last group I want to introduce you to as players in the whole assessing process is the CBJ Board of Equalization. So the BOE is a kind of a quasi-judicial board. They work in panels and they hear appeals for relief from alleged error in valuation on properties that are brought before the board. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the whole appeal process in just a few minutes. But I wanted to introduce this group as an important player in the process. The BOE works really hard during April and May to resolve appeals. We're always in need of people to serve on the BOE. So if you have an interest, I'm going to do a plug. Check out the assemblies.
We have 1 vacancy I just checked, and you can submit an application, which you can get from our website.
Thank you, Mayor. Perfect. So yes, if you go to the Assemblies Board and Commission website, you can find that application. What is incredibly important to realize is that BOE is separate completely from the assessor's office. So the members of the BOE are appointed by the assembly. They are typically trained by the state assessor. The city clerk's office coordinates their activities, and they are advised from a legal perspective from a different attorney than would be advising the assessor's office. So they are a complete and separate group from the assessor's office.
Look, I'll interrupt you again. And we have Mr. Epstein from the Board of Equalization. And who else? I apologize, I don't hear your name. Okay, thank you. We also have Gary Sonnenberg from the Board of Equalization. So if you want to ask about their experience and what this is all about, please do so, because we need another member.
Perfect. Thank you so much for making the introductions. So those are all the introductions that I want to do as far as players in the assessing process. I want to move into sort of the basics of who and what. So property assessment is at its base the value of a property for purposes of taxation. By Alaska Statute 29.45.110, the assessor is the who must determine the fair market value of taxable properties, and so that is the what. Fair and equitable, again, that is the goal of all assessors within the state, within the nation, is ensuring that there's a fair and equitable assessment. Just a fun fact for you, CBJ has roughly 14,000 parcels. So there is a lot of data and a lot of properties to look at throughout the year. Want to talk just quickly about the timeline. These are the same every year. So properties are assessed as of their condition on January 1st. So the assessment notices that will be coming out shortly will be the representation of property's value as of January 1st, 2024. We do have another type of property called business personal property. Those are declared by the business, and those are due on January 31st. In March, assessment notices are mailed out to all property owners. It's a really good time to take note. If you don't get an assessment notice, reach out to us, make sure we have your correct address. We do get a number of returned assessment notices every year. And so if you find yourself in the middle of March or you see the public service announcement that says, hey, the assessment notices went out and you haven't received yours in the mail, please reach out to us so we can make sure that we have your correct address and we can get a copy to you. Once those assessment notices are mailed, the appeal period starts, and you have 30 days from mailing of the assessment notices for appeals to be taken in. And again, we're going to talk about that in a little more detail in just a minute. And then in May, typically the Board of Equalization starts hearing appeals. And then on June 1st, the tax roll is certified by the assessor. So that gives the finalized number, if you will. Occasionally there have to be supplementals if there are a lot of appeals that go past that June 1st date. But June 1st, we do a tax roll certification. So let's just talk a minute about the types of property. There's two kinds of properties from a big split perspective. There's real property and there's business personal property. The real property is really kind of what it sounds like. It's tangibles, right? It's lands, it's buildings, it's fixtures. For the average person, you and I, we call it real estate. But in the assessment world, we call it real property. And they're divided into three major categories in Alaska, and that is residential, commercial homes, and mobile homes. And that division is broken out in statute. Then we have business personal property, and that's all the tangible assets that you would use in a business that's not the land or the building. So it's your equipment, your supplies, your furniture, big machinery, things like that. So those are the types of properties that are valued. And again, I will say this again and again, the goal of assessment is to produce fair and equitable valuables. And this is achieved through a lot of things. And just to put a broad umbrella around it, it's through training of our staff, it's through experience of our staff, it's through using the standards. We have multiple approaches that we use when we're considering property values and trying to figure out where something lands. We do a lot of checks, quality control checks, a lot of math to check things out, and a lot of analysis that goes along with that. So before I get into some of the details about how we actually do that property assessment, I want to debunk just a couple of myths. So the first one is that assessments are magic. There is no black box that has, or a magic top hat where we pull out numbers. There are methods and processes for getting to evaluations. Also, there's not different assessments for different people. So again, it's fair and equitable. It's the same measuring stick across the jurisdiction. Assessments aren't determined by an algorithm in a supercomputer. So we don't feed a bunch of data into a supercomputer and it spits out numbers that then is your valuation. We do use software to help us determine if our valuations make sense. It's part of our check process, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's not a super secret computer hiding in a back room that figures out those numbers. Also, it's not random. We don't just put numbers on a dartboard and try to pick numbers. So there is definitely process and theory behind what we do. So at CBJ, we've got professionals using the standards and methods of their trade, things that they've learned through the IAAO, the AAAO, governed by state statute and by CBJ code. Property assessments are an estimate of a property's value. So it's important to remember even our assessment is an estimate of a property's value. The IAAO has a great definition, and for property assessment valuation, it's defined as the most probable price expressed in terms of money that a property would bring if exposed for sale in the open market in an arm's length transaction between a willing seller and a willing buyer, both of whom are knowledgeable concerning all of the uses to which it is adapted for and which is capable of being used. It's a great definition. It's also 5 lines long. So I want to focus on just a couple of pieces of this. First, it's the most probable price. So this gets us to putting property values in terms of dollars. And it's, again, it's still an estimate, but we're looking at that price in terms of money. And it's if the property were for sale in an open market. And so one of the things that we look for is where we can bring in data, we look for those open market, regular sales, not that I sold my house to my little brother and gave him a deal. It protects against people who might really overpay for property, people who might really underpay for property. And it provides that protection by looking at a typical sale, a typical value with 2 normal people transacting that know what they're doing, essentially, is the gist that I want you to take away from that definition. And this is pulled right off of the IAA webpage, or IAAO, too many acronyms in this world for sure, their definitions. So let's talk about some of the approaches that we use. And one of the things to remember is multiple approaches are used to understand a property's value and to arrive at that final determination of a value. So the classical approaches, if you will, are the cost approach, which is looking at how much it would cost to construct a replacement building, and then that is adjusted for the age and the condition of the property, plus the land value. I'm not sure what just happened. Die. I stopped sharing? Okay. Okay, I can fix that, I think. Can I hit okay to this?
Oh, what does it say?
I don't want to leave the meeting.
Correct, yeah.
Share screen.
There you go.
Whoa! It's Friday and they are out for sure. It's probably because I have my paper rubbing across the top of the keyboard. All right, so cost approach. So it's how much it would cost to construct a brand new building to replace what's there, but then that amount is adjusted for the age of the building, the condition of the building. So it's not a true like just plain old what's the lumber and labor to get something built. So it's that value, but then it's adjusted for the age and the condition of the structure, and then the land value is added in. So that is one way to look at the value of a property. Another way to look at the value of property is by looking at sales, recent market sales. And I just want to point out that looking at sales is one of the first standards, one of the primary standards of the IAAO. And it's a standard that our community has decided to abandon. That was done through an ordinance and a vote to not require mandatory disclosure. And so that is the one standard that we don't adhere to from the IAAO at the direction of the voters. So we use sales prices as those are voluntarily provided to the assessor's office. We can get sales data through a number of ways, and we validate those sales. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But we look at the sales that are what people are paying for properties at this time. So that would be the sales approach. And then the income approach is estimating typical income and typical expenses of a property. That could be a rental property or it could be commercial. And so we utilize these approaches based on data availability, the data quality, and the property type to, again, achieve that fair and equitable assessment. One of the things that I did want to share about this is that when the assessor's office is looking at home values, it's different than if you're trying to like get a mortgage on your home and you have an appraiser come out and look at the value of your home. So that's typically called fee appraiser, and their goal is to check out the inside, outside of the home, find some comp sales in the area, and justify to the mortgage company that the home is worth X number of dollars and could be used as collateral for a loan. That's different from what the assessor's office is doing. They'll use that sales data, but typically the assessor's office only sees the exterior of the home. They have other, data through permitting and other places where they can, gather information about homes. But assessing from creating an assessed value for property tax purposes is different from getting, say, an appraiser to come look at your home for a mortgage. You're just looking at some slightly different things. Oops, and now that okay, great, we're back in business. All right, a couple of other tools that the assessor's office uses is computer-assisted mass appraisal. CAMA, you guys probably have heard of that. It's really just software that allows us to look at a whole bunch of attributes of properties and kind of slice and dice data in various ways. At its base function, it helps us determine land values, and we can put those land values in there. You typically get at a per square foot value, and you adjust that square footage of the land based on a whole bunch of different attributes. And then the improvement value, so the buildings that are on the land, are typically added in at this super cool value that is called replacement cost new less depreciation. And this is kind of along the lines of that cost approach, where it looks at what it would cost to build that building fresh, but then adjusting it for size, how it's constructed, age, quality, other features. To get to this data, we do use a third-party vendor. For those of you that are in the industry, Marshall & Swift is a typical vendor that has cost-type data that's used by many assessing organizations throughout the nation. And so we do have a subscription to be able to gather their data and use that as a comparator as we're analyzing data. So land and their improvements are reviewed annually. They're reviewed for adjustment annually, and then we look at comparable sales through a ratio study. So I'm going to talk about the ratio study process next, but it's just important to know that CAMA is really just a software piece that we use to help look at our various parcels within the city and borough. So for those of you who love math, like love is in quote, and your eyes are glazing over, hold on for just a second. We won't spend too much time on the ratio study. The ratio study basically says, I want to look at sales of a property compared to this cost approach. and I'm going to put that as a fraction. So hypothetically, if you had a home that sold for $1 million and the current assessed value is $900,000, your ratio would be 0.9 or 90%. On the flip side, if you had a home that sold for $400,000 and the assessed value was $410,000, your ratio would be 1.025 or 102.5%. And so the assessor's office looks at those sales data that we have, the cost data that we have in this ratio, and makes adjustments in response to the median assessment of sales prices. And that there's X percent in there because that percentage may change by a lot of different factors. And this is where our assessors training and experience and collaboration with other entities and understanding what's going on in the marketplace comes into play. The last couple of years, we've aimed at 98% of the median assessment value being 98% of the sales prices. For the 2024 valuations, we're looking at 95%. And that number, it doesn't fluctuate hugely, but it does fluctuate a little with whatever's going on in our community. The IAAO talks about coefficient of dispersion. For those of you who love statistics, we can have an offline conversation about that. But basically, it's the best indicator of assessments across kind of the universe of properties. And what you want is that ratio to be clumped together tightly. And that coefficient of dispersion tells you how spread out your ratios are or how close together they are. And so the lower that coefficient of dispersion is, the better things are. We will get these slides posted along with the recording of this, but the IAAO has a whole paper on standards on ratio studies. And we can get into lots of fun ratio conversations and statistics offline. I teach statistics in in another part of my life, and I know that makes people anxious and they'd rather do other things. But it's an important tool that our assessors use to understand the valuations in that assessed value versus the sales price as they're trying to get us to a market value. So just even talking about these various different tools, you can imagine that the assessor's office has to collect a tremendous amount of data in order to analyze properties in many different ways. So they're looking at sales data, they're looking at replacement costs, they're looking at typical costs or expense data to operate and repair properties, they're looking at rent or income data. Particularly in the residential sector, every 5 years they do what's called a canvassing, and that's where they go out and they physically look at properties. And they go out to a property, they take exterior pictures, they're only looking at the exterior, they're not going inside, and they're taking notes about structures or conditions. There's a shed, there's a deck, there's a metal roof, there's shingled roofs. All of those things, they're just taking note of the condition. And then they update the data within our software about those structures every 5 years. And that's just, it's a pretty typical way to physically validate your property data, especially when you're looking at so many parcels across such a large area. With the addition of our commercial appraiser, we are looking at commercial properties on a more regular basis. And commercial properties are a little bit different than residential in that they're divided into sectors. So for instance, you might have retail or multifamily housing, like apartment buildings, warehouses, just different types of commercial property. And so with that idea of canvassing in mind, the commercial appraiser is going to look at those sectors regularly just through a cycle. And so in this cycle of assessments, warehouses has been the main focus. And in looking at, say, the warehouse sector, understanding what properties we have in Juneau that are warehouses, what are their typical expenses, what are their typical incomes, what's going on across the nation in that particular sector. the best, what's the best approach to take when trying to put a property value on a commercial property like that. So each of, the various sectors within the commercial area will be rotated through on a regular basis so that those commercial properties are kept up to date, they're kept relevant, they're adjusted as appropriate. And they'll work, I we can talk about the exact cycle maybe offline, but they'll get in a regular cycle, just like the residential properties do. So I did want to talk just briefly about, just from kind of a picture cycle of what it is that the assessor's office does. So they, we're going to start, so they certify the roll June 1st. We're going to go to a happy place where all of the appeals from the previous year are done. We're done dealing with anything from the prior year cycle. They're going to do some preliminary work. They're going to do their preliminary ratio studies. They're going to see where things are starting this next cycle. They're going to go out and canvass their properties that they would do for that year. They're going to collect and look at sales data. They're going to analyze those. When they're looking at sales data, they have to kind of qualify the type of sales. So there's a couple of terms that you might hear used. I just want to throw those out there for you. A qualified sale is a sale that would be used in our analysis. It appears that the transaction was done at arm's length. We know the price. Again, it seems like you have that willing buyer, willing seller that understand what their property is capable of doing. We have non-qualified sales, which means that the information that we have isn't adequate enough. There's questions. We need to do a little more research to be able to use that sales. Certainly, there are a lot of sales that happen where we know that an owner's changed, but we don't have any sales information available. And then we sometimes do reject sales information because it's either suspect or it doesn't appear to be typical market sale. So, back to the example of if I own a home and I sold it to my little brother and gave him, a screaming deal because he's my little bro, then, that's not an arm's length transaction. And so that would not necessarily be a qualified sale because there are other factors involved in it. So they validate sales information that they have, and then they use that to look at their data and they build the models. And the goal is to have the value of two homes that are identical be the same, right? And so with 14,000 parcels, we do modeling and we look at the valuations and we look at the details. And this is where, thank goodness we're not doing this 100 years ago because we have the benefit of computers and software to help run calculations for us and to spit out results where we can look through and see what the results are. We can do ratio analysis. And you'll see between modeling and valuation and review and assessments and ratio result, there's a loop back because once they've gotten all the data that they're going to be able to use for this cycle, they analyze it, they run their models, they see the output, they check it over. Does it make sense? Does it meet expectations? Are there outliers? Are there changes they wouldn't have anticipated? They can look at data across multiple different ways. And so when they finally have gotten where they feel like they've got that fair and equitable property valuations, they do a final quality review and then they mail out assessment notices. So I want to just talk a little bit more about that review and assessment. So they're looking for outliers. We're looking for big changes just to make sure that they make sense. They're looking for the trees in the forest. So does the aggregate make sense when they look kind of at how properties have changed as a whole, knowing all the details that they've worked in? And also, do the details make sense, kind of looking at the big picture? So they give it that once over, and they can slice and dice properties and, do comparisons and that same kind of, data validation by neighborhoods, by type of properties, by properties of certain ages. And so that they can feel good knowing that the data makes sense, nothing jumps out as needing to be analyzed more or adjusted, and that the values are fair and equitable. When they've reached that conclusion, then they're ready to do that just final QC, and then they generate the assessment notices. We are still required to mail them via the United States Postal Service. So that is how assessment notices are generated, and they do get mailed. Believe it or not, March 1st is a week from today. I'm not quite sure where February went, but we are staring at March next week, which means property assessment notices should be going out very soon. And so when those are printed up and they have on them the deadline to appeal, because that, when they get mailed, starts that 30-day clock, we'll typically send out a public service announcement through our communications officer here. And I would expect them to go out within the first couple of days here of March. That starts the appeal process. And so appealing is important. When you get your assessment notice, you should look at it. You should make sure it makes sense. You should make sure it represents your property. And if you feel like there's something in error, then we would encourage you to appeal. And so it's important to know there's no fee to appeal your assessment, but you do need to fill out a form. You do need to give us your parcel number. You need to give us the reason why the assessor's valuation does not reflect the property value, and your supporting documentation. It's important to note that appealing just because you don't like the number doesn't really work. But you could appeal because you said I have a deck and I actually don't. Or my house is exactly the same as this house and I have their sales data and I'd like to provide it to you. So, I mean, those are things that you can appeal. If you have information that changes, if you have information that would reflect that how the assessor has valued your property doesn't have all the information, you should appeal and you should provide that information. So appeals can't be based solely on the amount of the increase, the personal hardship, or an amount of an anticipated tax. It really needs to be something about the data around your property is not accurate. So what happens, oh, sorry, one more slide on appeals. Right out of statute, because it's always good to quote the statute directly. By law, the appellant bears the burden of proof. The only grounds for adjustment of an assessment are proof of unequal, excessive, improper, or undervaluation based on facts that are stated in a valid written appeal or proven at the appeal hearing. If the valuation is found to be too low, the Board of Equalization may raise the assessment. So with your appeal, you have to provide clear and convincing data to support your appeal. You have 30 days to file your appeal, but then you've got another 15 days to provide that supporting evidence. So just know that that time frame is really tight. Any appeals without supporting information may be dismissed by the Board of Equalization. So let's talk about what happens during an appeal. The first thing that happens is the assessor's office will review the information you've provided. A lot of our appeals are resolved through discussion with the assessor's office. It may be, maybe you provided pictures of the exterior or the interior of a property. Maybe you have, maybe a fee appraisal was done and there's comps involved that we can analyze and use. You know, the quality of the data and the type of data is so situational. You know, the more data that you can provide that's clear, accurate, and current helps the assessor's office work through your appeal and try to resolve the difference that you're seeing versus what they're seeing. And so, did I go away? No. The first step is a dialogue between the assessor's office. If that doesn't result in the appeal being resolved, then the appeal goes to the Board of Equalization for a hearing. If the Board of Equalization rules in a way that the property owner doesn't agree with, then the property owner can appeal to the Superior Court within 30 days of the BOE's decision. So we did have a number of appeals resulting out of the 2021 assessment season. And I think it's important to note that there were 18 appeals that went to the Superior Court, and 17 were resolved by the judge deciding that the Board of Equalization's decision was affirmed, which validated our process. There were a lot of other appeals that were in the works, and those were resolved via settlement, if you will, where the judge directed that CBJ use standards, the IAAO standards and the AAAO standards, to do their property assessments, which is exactly what we had been doing and will continue to do. So from that perspective, we feel really good that the processes that we have in place, while they're done by people, are good and solid. And through the appeals process, and a property owner has the opportunity to show how things are different, perhaps, than what the assessor's office sees. The last thing I just want to talk about that's related to assessments is exemptions. There are a whole series of exemptions available for properties for a number of reasons, and too many just to list on a slide. But it's important to remember that exemptions shift tax burden. So the goal of property assessment is to make sure that the tax burden is equitably distributed amongst property owners. Exemptions shift that. Typically, it's by policy. So I want to talk about three today because they're the most common used by regular people, and there are two of them that are mandated by the state. That's the senior citizen exemption and this disabled veteran exemption. So for the senior citizen exemption, you need to apply, well, both of them, you need to apply by March 31st. For the senior citizen, you have to be 65 years old, and the residence has to be your primary residence, and you have to be eligible for a PFD. Once you have that exemption applied to your property, it exempts the first $150,000 of your value of your home. You don't have to do anything else. There's an annual check that the assessor's office does, and until there's a property ownership change, that exemption stays with you as you're the property owner. The disabled veteran exemption has the same deadline of March 31st. It has to be the primary residence of the disabled veteran, and they need to be eligible for PFD. This most of the time requires an annual act of getting that letter from the VA stating your status as a disabled veteran. And it has the same exemption, $150,000 of assessed value may be exempt. The third one is an exemption that was put in place by the city, and that is a hardship exemption. And the deadline for that is April 30th. You have to qualify either as a senior citizen exemption or the disabled veteran exemption. And there's a whole bunch of other moving pieces and dollar values that change every year. So I specifically did not put all those details in this slide just because I wanted this deck to be a little evergreen. But it's important to know that the deadline is April 30th. It requires an application every year, and it requires tax returns for all of every member of the household, including renters. If you have renters in your household, in your house, they are considered part of your household. So those are some exemptions that are most commonly used with our property. So I just want to take us back to the beginning where we introduced the players, we talked about the who, what, and when of property taxes, and we talked about various methods and tools that are used to get to evaluation. My main takeaways for you today is that assessments are complex. They use a lot of data streams, a lot of analysis. Assessments are estimates, but they are the value utilized as the base for property taxation. And that our CBJ's appraisers in the assessor's office are trained professionals, and they are using the industry standards. They get training every year, and the tools that they use are standard tools used across the nation by assessing offices, and their goal is to produce those fair and equitable values. And with that, Madam Mayor,
Questions?
I guess we can take some questions. We have a little bit of time left.
Who has a question? Yep. Oh, I'm sure other people do. The green means it's on, and you're only talking on the mic so the Zoom people can hear you.
Okay.
You can hold it.
Oh, okay. I can hold it. You're gonna trust me with one of these again? Holy smokes. Angie, my name is Debbie White, and I do have quite a bit before my actual question. I did serve for 6 years on the Board of Equalization. I served one term on the Assembly. I just renewed my real estate license in January for the 13th time. This is my 25th year in the industry. And you're right, it's not magic. A fee appraisal uses the same methodology using cost and depreciation, sales, income. It's just the same. So what they're doing is the assessment is more like what we call a broker opinion of value, of which I am doing one this afternoon. It also goes through a CAMA audit. The Alaska Statute 2945-110 does say that your target is to be within 5% of the value. So I feel that your ratio results need to be examined a little bit more closely if you are completely disregarding a property owner's provided fee appraisal. And I want to know why you would disregard a fee appraisal that is done on an arm's length transaction when the property has been marketed.
I don't know that I have a precise answer for you, Debbie. Was Debbie? Yes, yes. I will get a full answer for you, and I'll post that with some FAQs on this. I do know that quality of appraisers would be looked at, quality, just a basic quality check and a fee appraisal is an estimate, just like the assessor's estimate is an estimate. So I don't have a generic answer for you. I know that more information is better than less information for the assessor's office, but there are a lot of details that they would look at, and they're looking at this. Help me out if I say this wrong, Mary. But they're looking at using that same yardstick for like properties, and so it's. The fee appraisal would do something similar, but it also has other uses. So let me work on a better answer for you, and I will get that back to you. I'm guessing the mayor knows how to get a hold of you, and we'll also put some FAQs together from this session. Thanks for your question.
Craig Dahl with the General Chamber. Thanks, Angie, for putting this on. Notice didn't get out till Tuesday, so I think we would have got a little better turnout, maybe with more notice. But a couple of questions. I'm going to kind of tag on Debbie a little bit, and without picking the scab off 2 or 3 years ago, I think the question about if I bring you, I just happen to be in the middle of a transaction, and I bring you a fee appraisal that shows that your assessment is significantly high. It does appear that it maybe doesn't get accepted. And would you adjust it back to the beginning of the year? I think there's some misunderstanding about the January 1 date. And if you adjust my assessment, does it back up to that date? And this happened, I'll just use an example of a commercial appraisal where, and it wasn't an appraisal. If you have a contract of sale to close within 30 days, significantly below assessment, but it was not accepted. And it just seems like when you bring data to the BOE that this is something that needs more attention. And I know you're not ready to answer those, but I would say that was one of the crucial factors in some of the discussion. I'm just going to keep rolling and then I'll be quiet. This is more trivia. You want to answer that?
I think I'm going to put that in the FAQ. I mean, there's the timing of when data comes in and where it is in the process is crucial. So we'll work on a good FAQ response for you on that. But, again, more data is better than less data, but it also is looked at in the aggregate for types of properties. And if there were outliers, if I understood your question correctly, and I'll go back and listen to the recording when we're done, when we do a full answer for you, Craig.
Okay, deserve discussion, right? I'm just curious, 14,000 parcels, 5 years, that's 58 a week. Really? Can you visit all those properties?
That's why they're on a for residential, we go on a 5-year cycle. I didn't follow your math, but, um,
You go out every week and get 50, 80 sketches, and somebody would say, okay, 14,000 parcels, look at that.
so we're not gonna look at 14,000 parcels every year. So, residential homes are done on a 5-year canvassing basis where they go out to particular areas of town and cover a bunch of houses within, a short amount of time. But it's you could expect as a homeowner that every 5 years, somebody from the assessor's office is gonna wander through your street, look at your home, take some pictures, make notes about how things look, and work on the homes on your street.
If I get my notice in the mail and I'm like, don't understand it, maybe I have very little understanding of what happens. Maybe I'm not sure if I want to do an appeal or not, but is there information there on who I talk to and who do I get to talk to if I just have questions?
Mary would love to answer your question directly. Press the button to get green.
There you go.
There you go.
Just call the office and somebody will talk to you about your property.
Is that on the card?
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody who wants the finance phone number, it's 907-586-5215. And it gets you into an amazingly fun phone tree, but one of the options is the assessor's office.
All right. We'll take one more and then we'll go to a couple on Zoom because there's a couple on Zoom.
So, I'm sorry, I'm Kelly Moore. So am I to understand that we do not need an official documented appraisal, that comparable sales can be brought to the BOE for discussion?
Do I get to phone a friend on that one, Mary?
So the question was, do you need to bring official looking document to the BOE?
Generally, we'll look at whatever documentation you have.
We'll take a couple online and I'll rely on the clerk to do that.
Paul, Kara, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so when I get my appraisal, it's a little 3x5 card, and one of the things you said is like, if I don't like the appraisal, I can say, well, you said I had a deck and I don't have a deck. Well, this little 3x5 card doesn't really tell me much as to what you looked at, how you came to that. Is there something or a link or something on that card to kind of show me how you arrived at that number? And that, for example, you said there was a deck, so that added whatever, $10,000 and that type of thing.
Paul, thanks for your question. If I understand your question correctly, it's a small card that you get. How do you get more details? There are two ways. One is you can call the assessor's office and ask them to talk with you about the attributes of your property. There is also, if you go to the Juno webpage, in the Department of Finance, you will see one of the first links on there is about parcel data, and you can click into that, and that is updated. It is updated regularly, and it requires a couple of pushes on the backside of IT to get everything out there, but that will give you information about your details about your property as well. It may be easiest just to call the assessor's office and ask them some questions.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, that's always my big thing is what am I really going to appeal this? What am I appealing? So I think you've helped in that. And if you provide more of that in another lunch and learn, that helps out.
Thank you.
We did have one member on Zoom, Ms. Brown. You raised your hand. I wasn't sure if you still wanted to talk, so let me allow you a moment there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I'm Carolyn Brown. I live in Douglas. I live right on the channel. I have a couple of questions. One is, a year or so ago or last year when the assessment came through, it was enormous compared to previous times. So I started talking with the person who was the assessor at the CBJ, and I asked the person if it was a he, had been to look at my house because there were a significant number of things that had happened in terms of wind damage, the taku, the weather, the snow, the pox, or the marks, and the slabs that were coming off the part of the house and so forth. And he didn't even know that I had a basement. And no, he had not been by. And then he started talking about the jargon of the computer and putting in all of the different numbers. And then there it goes in AI land almost. So I'm just wondering, this year, it's even worse because the weather has been much worse. My house has tons of things wrong with it. And that's the way it is. So my question is, I don't know when. Can I call and say, when was the last 5-year visit to my house made? I've been here over 22, 23 years. And do you have a piece of paper that says when you were here last and what you assessed the damages as and so forth? That's one question. The second is, if I make an appeal, you said, well, you got to gather all the data you can gather and bring it in and be prepared to defend it. And I guess I'm interested in what are the components of the data? Is it pictures? Is it a video? Is it the wind blowing? What kind of things are on that list of stuff I must be prepared to bring in and provide for you all? So those are my major questions. And the third one is, as we get more AI in our lives, do you anticipate that you will, at some point in time, we won't even talk to a person anymore. It'll all be done by AI. So those are my questions in that order. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Let me see if I can answer all of your questions in order. Absolutely. If you call the assessor's office, they can look up your parcel and see the last time that somebody was physically out looking at your property. They would have access to the notes that were taken. Related to your second question about what should you prepare, certainly pictures are useful. If you have pictures showing the condition of your home, I don't think that you would need to like record the weather, but certainly, documentation and pictures would be great about the condition of your home would be useful. And then third, to your question of AI, I don't know that any of us are going to escape AI. However, having humans in the mix with good judgment will always be, I think, a part of this process. And I would expect that as long as there are human residents in the city and borough of Juneau, that there will be human employees at the city and borough of Juneau ready to work with you and answer calls.
Any more questions? Try to keep them a little more generic than the last one.
Jack Chenoweth, my question to you is the record of the parcel, of a homeowner's parcel maintained at the assessor's office available for inspection by the homeowner? Available for review and examination by the homeowner?
Yes, that information is available. Most of it is computerized, but we can sit down and walk through that with you. And obviously, if you're planning to come down for a visit and you want to, spend some time with one of the appraisers looking at your information or sitting down with you to talk about how you might provide documentation, we usually have plenty of staff available Certainly if you, give a call and say, hey, can I set up an appointment to come down Tuesday at 10 o'clock? I want to spend about a half an hour. Here's my parcel. I've got questions. That allows our staff to be a little more prepared for you when you do show up and make sure that the right personnel might be there. Because, if we have the person on staff who last looked at your home and who made the notes about it, that may be more advantageous for you to talk with that person than whoever happens to be in the office at the moment if you just kind of swing by. But you're absolutely always willing to swing by and visit and chat with the folks in the assessor's office.
Any further questions? Okay. That's all right. We'll give you one more, Deb, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, touch the light. So I just wanted to add one more thing before you go. And when you're talking to me about why you would disregard a fee appraisal, I want you to keep in mind that fee appraisals do go through an underwriting process because the entities requesting them are turning around and lending anywhere from 65 to 100% of that value, whereas the city is doing it to collect about 1% of the value per year. So I will hold your feet to the fire to understand why a fee appraisal would not be accepted. And that's the last thing. And now she'll take it away from me for sure.
Thank you.
No, those are good
Absolutely.
questions. Anybody else? So this was our first one. We have 19 people online, so thank you guys for everybody to be here. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any feedback, please either email me at beth.weldon@gino.org or angie@angie.flick@gino.gov. We've changed the gov. Because we'll probably do this one more time for other people that didn't make it. So if you have anything to say, this would make it simpler, talk less about the ratios. Just kidding, Angie. So otherwise, we just appreciate everybody for coming here today, and hopefully this was helpful. And would you guys like to see these kind of things for different topics? Is this something, okay, I see nods around the room. So if you have topics that you want to see, I'm going to send them to katie.kester@geno.gov. So.
I'll take it.